This might just be the steak torta of your life. Hi everybody and welcome back to my kitchen. The topic today is a steak torta. Who doesn't love a steak torta? It's one of the most popular things that we offer at our restaurants. Certainly in Mexico, you can find lots of people making a steak torta, but more in this sort of upscale places. So I'm going to show you a way to do that will make the idea of having a torta into like a really special occasion. We're going to use a piece of flank steak for this. We're going to grill some onions. We're going to melt some cheese on it. When all of that comes together, oftentimes they'll call it a Pepito. So we are really making a Pepito, but almost every single torta will have a smear of beans on the bottom of the bolillo that you're making it in, or the bottom of the telera. I usually do that very simply by just working with a can of beans here, and I'm going to scrape out the beans and all of their liquid into food processor. You can do this in your blender as well. It's just a little bit more cumbersome when you do it in your blender, but I will say that what makes them really good, and you think about this is like the Mexican way of buttering your bread. I'm going to put a little bit of pork lard in here. You could use oil for that if you wanted to. Put the top on the food processor and make a paste out of it all. Okay, if the beans are not the consistency of softened butter, if they're too thick, then you're going to need to add a little bit of water to it. But if you're using canned beans or home-cooked beans that are covered with their liquid, it should be about the right consistency there. Okay, now on to the onion part of it. I've got a large white onion, and I'm going to cut it into rings that are about a little more than 1/4 of an inch here. I'm doing rings because it's just easier to cook them on the griddle, which is where I'm headed next. So we'll cut down through them. If you slice them, you just have to chase them all over the place. All right. So we've got those. I'm going to lay these out shingled here across this part of our baking tray here. Okay, I like to use a sprayer for oil. If you don't have a sprayer, then you could just brush some oil on it. So I'm going to cover them nicely with oil on this side. I have a small flank steak, about 1 pound, that I'm working with here. I would say that there's lots of different things that you could use for this steak torta, but I'm making it a special one. You might want to think about using a skirt steak, but it's more expensive typically than the flank steak is. And I love flank steak in this kind of a thing. So cover everything nicely with the oil. I'm going to spread these guys out just a little bit more because my next step here is to salt everything. Meat typically takes a little more salt than the vegetables do. And then I'm going to flip everything over and do the other side. And lastly, a little bit of pepper now over the top of everything here. Add just another dimension of flavor. And we are ready to go onto a hot cast iron pan, or for me in this case, it's going to be a griddle. I have a cast iron griddle over here that I've heated up pretty much as hot as it will get. It'll probably be around 450, 500 degrees. And so now everything goes on that. I know my griddle is hotter at the back. That's where I want to put the meat. And then I will put the onions in the front part of this here. So that's what I wanted to hear, is a good sizzle like that, because it means we will get a really nice crust on the beautiful flank steak. There we go. And that one's coming apart a little bit, but we will find it its home right in here. And another little piece that goes in there. There we go. Okay, now we are going to cook these until they're beautifully crusted on each side and golden brown or a little bit darker than golden brown. That's what creates all that beautiful flavor. So I'll see you back here when I have worked through all of that with these onions and that flank steak. I also mentioned skirt steak, and skirt steak is so expensive right now that I can't really encourage you to use it unless you have unlimited resources. But just think of anything that's about an inch cut of sirloin would work, although I think it tends to not be as beefy and goes to a stronger flavor when it's cooked like this. You might think about that weirdly named steak called flap steak, or you might choose to go for eye of the round, which would work. Just you would have to cut it, because it's like this. You would have to cut it into like 1-inch slabs and sear that. And of course, if it is summertime, what I did on my cast iron griddle today, you're going to want to do on your grill. This has been about 4 minutes per side on everything, and just look at how beautiful those onions look, the crust that we got on the flank steak. Now, I don't know how done you like your flank steak. I'm going to say that this is going to be about medium on this end, medium rare on that end. That's kind of what I'm looking for, but at this point, I'm going to take everything off and I'm going to put it on a cooling rack. Now, I'm doing this for a reason. If you put it directly on a baking sheet, you will start to lose a lot of the juices out, but if you put it on a rack over a baking sheet, you'll lose very little of the juices. I'm just going to put these guys right beside them. You'll notice that I lost one of my rounds over here when I was flipping it. A little part of it stuck and it kind of came apart, but that's all kind of okay now because everything is cooked through, and it's just easier, I think, to work with these things if they're in rounds like this. Okay, I'm going to let this rest for about, I'm going to say 10 minutes is a really good amount for all the juices to reabsorb in the meat, and then we'll build the tortas. Okay, this flank steak has rested for about 10 minutes. You always have to cook cut flank steak or skirt steak across the grain. It is absolutely essential. So the grains you can see in flank steak very obviously run the length of it that way. And so I'm going to cut into this. I like to do it on a bias. Some people will cut straight down, but I think that the bias cut gives you more beautiful meat. One of the things I love about working with flank steak is that it cooks really fast, and a little can go a long way if you're going to have a lot of people over. So I like to do flank steaks because if you cut it on the bias like this, and you cut fairly thin, which you always do with flank steak because it's a relatively tough cut of meat, but it's one that has so much great beefy flavor. So as promised, it's the meat is a little bit more like, I would say, medium-ish down there, and it's getting medium rare now as we get into the thicker part of the flank steak. So we take all of this sliced flank now, and I'm going to return it over here to this board. That's looking really tasty now. Now to our artisan bolillos, homemade bolillos. We're going to cut them in half, as I always like to say, around the equator, or you could say horizontally, just as you would expect to make a sandwich. And in Mexico, they will typically pull out a little bit of what they call the miga, or the center soft part of the bread on the bottom of each piece, to allow for having like a small well there to put all of your ingredients in. And now on to building our tortas. So I'm going to do that on a baking sheet here, and I'm going to set these guys up with the tops cut side down and the bottoms cut side up here. And then we will smear on a couple of tablespoons of the beans, each one. You'll want these to be spread from side to side. You can sort of think about this as the butter on the bread. And then we will start layering in the meat. Next, we'll go the onions. Now, I just broke the cooked onion rings apart. I think that looks really beautiful, and it's really easy to work with here. Next, we're going to put on some cheese. This is like a jack cheese, but in slices, makes it easier than doing it as a grated cheese here. And now we are ready to go into the oven and melt the cheese, rewarm the meat, and re-crisp the bread. We'll say something like about a 400-degree oven will be the right thing for us, so that it all happens quickly. I'm going to say about 4 or 5 minutes we'll heat them through and crisp that bread. Okay, look at that. Really beautiful stuff. Okay, let's finish these tortas. So I will move one of these guys over here, and its top is this piece right here. So this is typically served with pickled jalapeños on it. I always like to put salsa nearby so that people can put that onto the sandwich if they want to. But you put those on, put the top in place, and then let's just cut down through this beauty and set it right over here. Now, just look at that. Artisan bread, beautifully seared flank steak, caramelized onions, melted cheese, pickled jalapeños, and I've got some roasted tomatillo salsa to serve with it. That is a meal.